Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind.
Archie Green came to Iowa City in 1978 to work on her PhD. She is a remarkable woman with an inspiring story. Many of you have seen my guest heading for class, library, or home, wheeling down the sidewalks of Iowa City, cheerfully greeting friends and bravely facing the days in a wheelchair. She was born in Ames, Iowa in 1945, and was named after her great-grandfather, Archie Martin, who came to Ames along with his wife, Nancy, from Georgia. Archie remembers that when she was in grade school, that her family and relatives were the only blacks in Ames. In high school, she was elected student body president, the first black and third female. Her interests included music and singing. After graduation, she enrolled at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, and received a BA in English in 1967. She was awarded a Rockefeller grant and obtained her master's at Penn State in 1970. At Penn State, her health started to deteriorate. She returned to Ames to become an instructor, and her illness worsened. But for the rest of this story, I'll let Archie tell it. Welcome to One of a Kind, Archie.
Thank you, Ellen.
Tell me a bit about your family. What brought them from Georgia? I know it was at the beginning of the century when they came, about 1915. What brought them to Ames?
Nancy, my great-grandmother, was a cook down in Georgia, and she made very good food, and several people from the Ames area, when they were down in Georgia on a holiday, would stop by Grandma's Cafe, and they would say things like, "Oh, your ice cream will be good if you come to Ames." And that was enough inspiration or impetus for Grandma to come up and bring up all the family.
So you grew up in Ames, though, with some cousins, correct?
Yes. During the war in 45, two of my uncles and my father were in the war. And so their wives were all sisters, and we all cousins were born into my grandparents' house at 118 Sherman. So our gang, my cousins and I, lived with Grandma and Granddad Ship in their house during the war.
So your cousin, did you have any siblings?
At that time, my brother Grant or Butch, and then later my sister Marianne, Bruce, and Robert. There are 5 of us.
So your grandmother took you in, and she was a big influence in your life?
Both grandparents were, but Granddad was very quiet, and Grandma was the business person, got things done. Yes, they were, and they were very loving. And it was unusual in that later in my life, I would come to live with him again. But they were there when I was just born, and they came in again in their 60s, my late teens and 20s.
Now, in Ames, what was it like for you? Because there were so few blacks.
The blacks in Ames at that time were all related, most of them to me. There were a colony of us because at that time we tended to stick together, live fairly near each other, and there were a lot of children born to our families. So there were a lot of relatives, and we were very happy. We didn't have much, but we were very content and very happy.
I'm sure your grandparents and your parents were pretty proud of you when you were elected student body president.
At that time, I was living with my grandparents, and they were in on all the machinations going on at that time. It was an exciting time, but my cousin, a second cousin, had been elected years before, and he was the first black. And so they had experience through Fred's election, and then mine came later.
And I read that you loved singing. And
I did.
At the end of the interview, I'm going to play a tape that somebody recorded when you were in high school. You were offered a scholarship. What, you decided not to take it?
Yes, I was offered a music voice scholarship, and the reason I didn't take it was it sounded too much like work. And I enjoyed music, and I feared if I studied it, it would not be enjoyable to me. As it is even now, I cannot sing any longer, but I just enjoyed music so much, listening to it.
So you graduated from high school, Ames High, and you went to Fisk University and majored in English. And you had a professor there who mentored you and encouraged you, did he not?
Yes.
Tell me about him.
Ron and Mary Maxwell were given a grant from Penn State. Both were from State College, Pennsylvania, and came down to Fisk. Mary at Tennessee State. At that time, it was Tennessee A&I, and Ron at Fisk. And he was my professor in English and my advisor. When in 1967 they returned to Penn State, I was encouraged to come up to Penn State to do my graduate work, and so I did. They were just wonderful people, and at times, about at 2-year intervals, I go back to Pennsylvania, and they stay with them. And it is a very renewing time for me to see them and stay with them, too.
So every couple of years they send you a ticket to come?
Yes, yes.
Oh, and they're still well and living in
And very supportive, yes.
Oh,
I look forward to going back every time.
That's wonderful. Now, when you were getting your master's at Penn State, it was a fairly pivotal time in your life, was it not?
Yes, it was there that the disease started. And when I finished my master's, I went back to Iowa State to teach freshman comp. The disease had begun in Pennsylvania and was getting worse in Iowa when I went back the winter of 70-71. And I spent several periods in the hospital at that time.
But they misdiagnosed you, did they not?
Yes, they didn't know, doctors didn't know that much about what they thought was MS, which is not MS now. They wondered how much of it was emotional and how much physical. I later spent some time in the Mental Health Institute in Cherokee, Iowa, And it was there that the diagnosis became more stable. But even then, doctors were confounded. I spent most of my time in the infirmary wing of MHI simply because I could not walk. I was physically retarded or handicapped, but not mentally. And so it was one of my prolonged periods of being around older citizens, and that has helped me a lot to understand.
Who finally diagnosed you? And tell us the diagnosis, what they finally said.
Right now, with the advent of the MRI, they could say that my diagnosis is spinal cerebellar degeneration, which is genetic and is not MS. MS is a neurological disease like spinocerebellar degeneration, but it is not genetic. So really it was not doctors, it was the advent of the magnetic resonance,
Yes.
magnetic imaging that really made the diagnosis more conclusive. Who knows what it will be in the future with the advance of technology.
Well, what kind of support, did you have support when you were put into a mental hospital? I mean, did you have somebody there to support you, or were you all alone?
I was very alone, but the people there, the inpatients, were probably just as alone as I was alone. The nursing staff was very caring and very supportive. In fact, at one time, the disease had so progressed that my speech was totally, almost completely incoherent. And the nurses got together and pulled out a dictionary at night, and I would pronounce words. Sure, it is very rudimentary and very backwards, but it was just enough to keep me going. I had intensive therapy when I came to school here at Wendell Johnson, but the nurses' first compassion really was the thing
that inspired you. After the mental hospital, you went to a sheltered workshop.
Yes.
Yes, in Clear Lake.
Yes.
And were there for a short period of time?
The longest period was 1.5 years. That was very good. A handicap village had just opened at the time. It was a very good place. But again, I felt very frustrated because most of our people there were mentally handicapped. I was not. I was very, very physically handicapped, not mentally. And so it made talking to anyone for any length of time on a deeper level very frustrating for me.
Then you went from there to a nursing home where you were for about 3 years, correct?
Yes. Right before I came to Iowa City, I was in Oak Park Manor Nursing Home in Nevada, Iowa for 3 years. During that time, several people would come over and visit me. The reason kind of why I ended up there was that there were very few places where I could stay. I had not committed any crime, so jail or prison would be out. I was young, so a nursing home was fairly congenial.
And you wrote a essay when you went to the writer's workshop about what you called these people in a nursing home, the twilight people.
Yes.
And I read the essay, and I just want to share the last couple paragraphs because you said that you were about ready to be released after 3 years, and your departure was not the way you thought it would be. And let me just read this. You said, "After 3 years, I said goodbye to Eva and the entire nursing home, having been accepted in a nearby university's graduate program. The day I left, Eva and the others were strangely quiet. I had expected something more from them. Now, years later, I understand what my leaving meant. I had become one of them, and now I was forsaking their company by leaving. I had made the decision to leave, was young enough, had the smarts enough and the gumption enough to leave. Their strange reaction made sense, but they didn't reckon what good things I carried in me that they had taught, or that had I known the intensity of university life that was awaiting me, I probably wouldn't have left the home's security. Now, with the flawlessness of hindsight, I judge my time there, the anguish, frustrations, tears, and toil of those long days and longer nights were manuring and watering a fine field whose joys and triumphs could only be understood having experienced life among the twilight people." What did you learn from these people, Archie, these 3 years you were at the home?
Probably the lasting thing is to go slowly, to appreciate many things, but to go slowly in order to really see them. And probably infirmity had slowed the people down, the clients there down. My illness had slowed me down, and I was able to appreciate things around me. That's what mainly they taught me.
Then who inspired you to apply to go get your PhD at the University of Iowa?
2 friends that are very, very dear to me, Doris and Don Riggs. I went to school, grew up with their oldest daughter, Janie. She also played the piano for me in high school. Janie was killed her freshman year in an auto accident in college. And Don and Doris, became my parents. And in fact, when I needed to apply, they took me to the University of Illinois in their car. They got me to Iowa, in fact, in their car. They are just wonderful people.
And they live in Ames still?
Yes, they do. I think of them often. I hope to see them soon. There are so many very, very wonderful people. Ellen and Don Hedwiger.
Now, who are they to you, and how did they influence you?
In high school, I babysat for Ellen and Don. And later in life, in the summer times, I would come back and live with them during the summers. Again, just wonderful, inspirational people who were open, like Don and Ellen, and like Don and Doris, too.
The ones at Penn State?
Don and Doris in Ames.
In Ames.
Marion Vaughn at Penn State. So many. Very, very good people.
Now, at this time, when you were in the sheltered workshop and the nursing home, had your grandparents died?
My grandfather had died my freshman year at Fisk in '63. He had died. My grandma was getting older. When I came to live with him in early 60s, late 50s, they were in their 60s. So I am a child of their old age, kind of. And although they didn't bear me at all, they reared me the formative years, 13 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
They came back into my life, or I came into their life.
Did your father come back from the war?
He did. He and my mother lived in Omaha, Nebraska for a time.
Mm-hmm.
They got divorced in the late 50s.
And we're in Omaha then?
Yes.
Well, you, besides your music from your high school years and your obviously love of literature and English, you like to write, and you wrote the essays for the Writers' Workshop assignment, and you like to write poetry. And I know a couple months ago you sent me a lovely poem, and I'd like you to read it. It's called The Gift. Would you?
Thank you. The Gift. To give as a lover offers his beloved a gift. Winter, old, cold, and blanched, casts a blessing on spring. He does not wonder at this final gesture. He gasps for breath. His white vapor chills the quiet child. She cries, and her tears water the earth, making a deep green carpet for her tender feet. Gifts are just that, so necessary, so dear.
It's lovely. I know a woman that influenced you, or that you've been friends, is this Margaret Culver. She lives in Iowa City.
Yes.
And
when I think of all these people that have just come at very important times in my life, I think of Margaret. Because when I came here to graduate school and chose a poet to write about, George Herbert's poetry, I couldn't read. My eyes do not move fast enough on the printed page. Margaret Culver read into a tape recorder all George Herbert's poems in the church section for me. Margaret Culver is a wonderful, wonderful person. There's, I think, a Chinese adage, but a good friend of mine always says this to me: when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears. Margaret appeared.
You went to your high school reunion, 30th high school reunion, not high school, excuse me, college reunion at Fisk. What was that like for you?
It was a wonderful experience. I had not seen a lot of these people for 30 years. In fact, the word they got was that I had died in the meantime. And so it was like rising from the dead to appear. It was very good. Fisk is a predominantly black school, and it was one of the first, probably it and Omaha were the first two times of being around my people. And so it was very, very good. It was unusual in that most of the people attending Fisk were from the upper black class. And I had no pedigree. I was from the sticks in Iowa. But I was very refreshing and very likable. And they became very refreshing and likable to me, too.
Oh.
So it was give and take.
That's good. Besides listening, I know I've seen you at concerts and writing. What other interest are you enjoying?
I find I am liking to cook. In my apartment, I enjoy coming home from work and cooking. I'm amazed at myself because it's not something I think about and want to do. And I enjoy it very much. I'm surprised.
And how about the computer? Are you enjoying the computer?
Oh, that is a godsend. When I was writing my dissertation, I screwed up 5 different times and was a member of a just started support group, dissertation support group. And we were all encouraged to get computers. And that was my love affair with the computer. I work on my poetry. It's very easy, too, to use the computer that way.
What for you, Archie, is the most, maybe one of the most significant things, positive things about living here in Iowa City? Because you've decided to stay when you came to work on your PhD.
The ease, getting around, the ease with the people, they are very genuine. The ease of Iowa City.
And I've seen you for years at the public library as a volunteer, and now you're working here.
Yes, that job, in fact, my volunteering job turned into a paid position. That is very good. I have a special allegiance and care for the library because it seemed like, again, when I was down and out, after I had graduated, the library took an interest in me, and I became salaried. I am very thankful for that.
Now, you mentioned you have some siblings. I know you have a brother in Ames.
Yes.
And you have a brother in Omaha?
I have a brother who's a janitor in Ames. I have another brother who lives outside of Ames. I have a third brother who lives in Lafayette, Colorado, and my sister lives in Omaha, Nebraska.
Archie, I've talked to you about this before. When I see you, you always inspire me. Where do you draw your strength? And you seem to have an aura of being so cheerful and pleasant and upbeat, and I see you whizzing down the sidewalk after getting your tires pumped up at the gas station. It's you're quite something. Where does this come from?
I think it comes from other people, kind of knowing what they have gone through and what is out there for me makes me very thankful and appreciative of other people and appreciative of living. You just get excited because you know that out there is both good and bad. And it's a challenge to experience it.
Well, with that, I will conclude this talk, and I'm so appreciative of you sharing your story. It's been a real treasure for me. My guest on One of a Kind has been Archie Green. Archie meets life with courage, determination, and such goodwill. She received a master's from Penn State and a PhD from Iowa, attended summer courses at the Writers' Workshop. She currently works at the public library, attends concerts, reads, writes poetry, and enjoys music. Many generous women and men have helped her along the way, and she, in turn, has inspired countless others. Archie Green is one of a kind.
recurring like the